Religious freedom is an objective desire and human right, but only when it's exercised by global citizens. Joseph Henry, the Harvard anthropologist, writes that humanity is on the cusp of becoming a global citizen. I hope he's right, but it takes a lot of people to embrace one another as truly global citizens. That concept has two components. First, we need to accept that we are all similar in a biological sense as Homo sapiens. And second, we are in a sociological legal sense the same as that most of us are citizens. The major impediment to becoming a global citizen is that members of our species generally act upon in-group, out-group identifications. And that is an identification that is deeply embedded in our evolutionary, and I could even say genetic, development. In-group, out-group thinking has been vital for the survival of Homo sapiens on the globe, but in a globalizing world, it is imperative that we rise beyond that. To do so requires that we understand what a global citizen is, and there are two conceptions that will help us understand it. First, the notion of living in an imagined community, and second, the fact that we need to rise beyond the 5 levels of intentionality that Daniel Dennett distinguished. For about 200 to 300 years that Homo sapiens has walked this globe, they lived in physical communities of people with about 50 to 150 individuals. They knew each other very well. They know who to turn to for food, for mediation in conflict, and for protection against predatory groups from the outside. Now, during the 10 to 12,000 years that humans were busy getting experience with domesticating some plants and animals, they slowly moved from a nomadic hunter-gatherer existence, which is a physical community of people, to living in sedentary agricultural communities. And as soon as they started learning to produce for a surplus, which allowed populations to grow, humans started to live in imagined communities of people where you no longer know most members of your community. Now, as for those 5 levels of intentionality, what Daniel Dennett called, the first level is that you know you're existing. The second level is that you know that there are others like you who exist. And that is characteristic for primates. Humans distinguish themselves by living at 3 other levels as well. First of all, or the third level of intentionality, is that we realize how we wish to be seen by others, and thus we present ourselves in the best possible way to those others. The fourth level is that we generally operate in accordance with social norms and values. And the fifth level, that many human beings identify themselves through symbolic constructs, usually of a political and or religious nature. Now, in-group, out-group identification is based on who we physically and visibly are, so female, male, and skin color and tone, who we grew up with, our parents, our peers, and where we grew up. And those 3 influence where we stand politically and religiously. Now, we live in a globalizing world because of increased intertwinement of economies, accelerated communication, of transnational, supranational, international, public, non-profit, and private associations, and of highly increased migration of populations across the globe. That means, especially in Western democracies, that people live in multicultural and multi-ethnic imagined communities. Now, it is imaginable that it is not easy to live in an imagined community where you hardly know everyone, and even when it is a fairly homogeneous population, such as that of Iceland. But it is far more difficult to live in an imagined community that is multicultural and multi-ethnic. And evidence of that is the rise of populist political parties in Western democracies since the 1990s that operate and flame upon the populist, almost prehistoric fear of living in a minority-majority country. Given that we live in a globalizing world, we need to become aware of differences and similarities. The similarities I already mentioned. We're biologically human species and we're sociologically citizens. But that is so far where global citizenship seems to end, because people continue to identify as belonging to a particular in-group. To become global citizens, I think, requires a 6th level of intentionality, where we transcend the simplistic and stereotypical in-group identifications that helped humanity survive thus far. It will no longer serve us in a globalizing world. The only way that such can be achieved is through open-minded dialogue with those who we at first blush identify as not like us because of skin color or because of gender, and who we find out by talking through that we're not like us because of political or religious affiliations. The only thing we need to find out from each other is that we're mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, friends and people. That will take